There is a specific kind of suffocating silence that fills a high-floor executive boardroom right before an arrogant man attempts to destroy your life. It was 3 o'clock on a humid Friday afternoon inside the glass headquarters of Veritas Dynamics. At the head of a 20-foot polished mahogany table sat our chief executive officer, Julian Thorne. He was 49 years old, impeccably groomed in a custom charcoal suit, leaning back in his Italian leather armchair with a smirk that dripped with condescension. Across the reflective wood surface, he slowly pushed a thick black file back toward me. "My name is Dr. Frank Miller. I am 49 years old, and for the past 3 years, I had served as the lead principal hardware and chemical engineer at Veritas Dynamics. Over 36 grueling months, I had logged 80-hour work weeks inside our subterranean testing facilities. I surrendered weekends, canceled family vacations, and sacrificed sleep to solve a problem that top energy researchers considered physically impossible. I had engineered a breakthrough ceramic electrolyte architecture for solid-state electric vehicle batteries. In simple terms, it was a revolution that doubled energy density while entirely eliminating thermal, runaway, and explosive fire risks. Just 14 days prior, an independent team of certified corporate valuation auditors had thoroughly examined my empirical testing data. They formally appraised the intellectual property portfolio at a conservative $15 million. Julian Thorne did not care about the underlying thermodynamics. He did not care about the verified safety data, nor did he care about the independent valuation. He looked around the room at his assembled board of vice presidents, who all nodded in unison like well-trained show dogs, and let out a short, mocking laugh. "Frank," Julian said, his tone soaked in patronizing pity, "we have completed our internal executive evaluation of your little project. To be entirely frank with you, it is nothing more than unviable, bloated junk science. It is a financial sinkhole designed to justify your excessive salary. Veritas Dynamics is pulling the plug effective immediately." He rested his forearms on the table, leaning forward in an overt attempt at psychological intimidation. "Your patent portfolio is utterly worthless to this firm," Julian continued. "It is an operational money pit. Effective right now, we are canceling the project and releasing you from your employment contract." To an outside observer, this appeared to be a routine corporate redundancy. But I understood Julian better than anyone in that building. His cruelty was never reckless. It was a cold, calculated business maneuver. Under Section 9 of my executive employment contract, a very specific compensation trigger existed. If Veritas Dynamics formally assigned, accepted, and commercialized a patent developed under my operational direction, I was contractually entitled to a guaranteed 15% cash buyout bonus. On a $15 million valuation, that meant Julian owed me exactly $2,250,000 in liquid funds, alongside the immediate vesting of my executive stock options. Julian did not actually believe my patent was worthless. He knew it was a historic technological breakthrough. However, he was an obsessively greedy corporate manipulator preparing for Veritas Dynamics' upcoming major funding round. He realized that if he officially abandoned the project, declared the intellectual property dead on arrival, and terminated my employment, he would not have to pay me a single cent of my earned $2,250,000 bonus. Julian reached into his suit jacket, produced a single document, and slid it across the table alongside a heavy silver pen. It was a formal intellectual property rejection and abandonment waiver. The document was explicit. It stated that Veritas Dynamics officially relinquished all corporate claims, future ownership, and licensing rights over the solid-state battery patent portfolio, terminating my project lead role and releasing the firm from all financial obligations. Julian leaned back, placing his fingertips together, waiting for the psychological collapse. He expected me to scream, to weep, or to desperately beg for my livelihood. The vice presidents leaned forward, eager to watch a veteran scientist break under pressure. Instead, I took a calm, measured breath. I picked up the silver pen, clicked the top, and signed my full name across the signature line without the slightest tremor in my hand. I folded the stamped document neatly and slipped it into my leather briefcase. "Thank you for your clarity, Julian," I said quietly. Julian blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my complete composure. He offered a tight, dismissive smile, thoroughly convinced he had just saved his balance sheet millions of dollars while humiliating me in front of his executive team. What Julian failed to realize in his frantic rush to evade my bonus was that his overwhelming avarice had blinded him to basic contract law. He believed he was throwing me out onto the street empty-handed. He had no earthly idea that by signing that abandonment waiver, he had just granted me complete, unencumbered, personal ownership of the very technology that would dismantle his corporate empire before Monday morning. I packed my personal belongings into a single cardboard box, walked past the quiet workstations of the research floor, and passed through the heavy glass doors of Veritas Dynamics. The cool Friday afternoon air greeted my face, and for the first time in 36 months, I felt an extraordinary sense of liberation. Up on the penthouse floor, I could see the distinct silhouette of Julian Thorne standing against his window, swirling a glass of scotch, watching me walk to my sedan. He assumed I was driving home as a broken man whose career was in ashes. He was catastrophically mistaken. I was executing a strategic contingency plan that I had established 18 months earlier. When I was first headhunted by Veritas Dynamics, I performed an extensive background analysis on Julian Thorne. His reputation in the technology corridor was notorious. He had a habitual pattern of discarding principal scientists. Right before major liquidity events, stripping inventors of their equity, and claiming personal credit for their breakthroughs. Knowing the character of the executive I was dealing with, I took legal precautions before signing my initial employment contract. Before I ever stepped foot inside Veritas Dynamics laboratories, I had personally funded and completed all foundational mathematical equations and chemical simulations on my private home servers. When Human Resources presented the agreement, I insisted on inserting Clause 14b. Clause 14b established that any derivative patents built upon my pre-existing, privately owned mathematical models remained conditionally tied to the firm. Veritas held only an exclusive option to retain that technology provided they commercialized it and paid the required inventor bonuses within 30 days of filing. If Veritas explicitly rejected the IP or issued a formal abandonment waiver, that conditional option vanished instantly. Total unencumbered ownership reverted entirely back to me as an individual under federal patent statutes, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. Julian was a spreadsheet manager who never read fine legal print. He saw my patent as a short-term liability requiring a $2 million payout. He assumed that by forcing me to sign an abandonment release, he was locking the invention in a corporate vault where it would gather dust. He made two fatal miscalculations. First, he assumed an individual scientist without corporate backing could never commercialize complex hardware. Second, he believed my patent was useless without Veritas's multi-million-dollar laboratory. He failed to realize that manufacturing facilities can be contracted overnight if you possess capital. What cannot be bought is a definitive solution to the thermal degradation crisis that had paralyzed the global clean energy market for a decade. By 6 o'clock on Friday evening, I was sitting inside my study at home, listening to the rain fall against the window pane. On my desk lay the signed IP abandonment waiver. Beside it was the encrypted hard drive containing 60 gigabytes of verified thermal stress reports and empirical lab data. I picked up my phone and dialed a private unlisted number. The line rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered, Malcolm Hayes speaking. Malcolm Hayes was the founder and chief executive officer of Zenith Energy, Veritas Dynamics' most formidable corporate rival. For 3 long years, Veritas and Zenith had been locked in a bitter struggle to secure a multi-hundred-million-dollar contract with Omni Motors, the nation's premier electric vehicle manufacturer. Whichever company delivered a stable solid-state architecture first would claim an absolute monopoly over the clean energy market. Mr. Hayes, I said with total composure, this is Dr. Frank Miller. As of 3 hours ago, I am no longer associated with Veritas Dynamics. There was a profound pause on the receiver. Malcolm knew my reputation intimately. He had tried to recruit me 2 years ago, but I had stayed to finalize my research. Dr. Miller, Malcolm said, his interest instantly focused. To what do I owe the honor of a Friday evening call? I am calling to inform you that I have officially departed Veritas, I replied. And more importantly, I possess absolute, unencumbered personal ownership of the solid-state ceramic electrolyte patent portfolio. Malcolm went entirely silent. Veritas let you walk with the core intellectual property? Julian Thorne officially declared it junk science to evade a $2 million contractual bonus, I explained. He signed a board-witnessed abandonment waiver, surrendering all legal rights. I am holding the executed document in my hands right now. Within 20 minutes, Malcolm convened an emergency encrypted video conference. Appearing on my screen were Malcolm, his chief legal officer, and his vice president of research and development. I did not ask them to take my word for anything. I transmitted my encrypted testing files directly to their secure server alongside a high-resolution scan of Julian's signed waiver. For 45 minutes, Zenith's executive team analyzed the data in real time. I watched through the webcam as their head of research stared at his monitors, his expression shifting from skepticism to absolute astonishment. For over 12 months, Zenith had been stonewalled by high-voltage chemical breakdown. My ceramic matrix eliminated that exact barrier. Malcolm looked directly into his camera, his eyes burning with intensity. Dr. Miller, Julian Thorne did not merely make a mistake. He handed us the entire global market on a silver platter. What are your terms? I stated my requirements without hesitation. I require a corporate partner who respects scientific integrity, pays for true value, and possesses the capital to scale manufacturing immediately. Malcolm did not hesitate for a single second. By 2:47 in the morning on Saturday, Zenith's legal department transmitted a binding, executed master agreement. First, Zenith agreed to purchase exclusive worldwide licensing rights to my patent portfolio for $30 million in liquid cash, exactly double the $15 million appraisal Julian had dismissed as worthless. Second, Malcolm provided a $4 million upfront signing bonus and appointed me as Chief Technology Officer of Zenith Energy, granting me total operational command over their entire hardware division. Throughout Saturday and Sunday, while Julian Thorne was playing golf at his exclusive country club, boasting to his peers about how he had trimmed operational costs by firing an expensive scientist, an unstoppable legal storm was gathering in downtown office towers. I spent the entire weekend inside Zenith Energy's legal war room. A dedicated team of 15 elite corporate attorneys, patent specialists, and regulatory experts worked in continuous shifts, while Malcolm's corporate lawyers finalized the $30 million master licensing agreement. Our International Patent Council executed emergency secondary filings across European and Asian jurisdictions under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. We secured every derivative, manufacturing modification, and chemical compound associated with my core matrix. By Sunday afternoon, the legal structure surrounding the technology was entirely impenetrable. Next, we engineered the timing of our strike. Corporate retribution is most potent when delivered at the peak of an antagonist's public hubris. We scheduled our official press releases and Securities and Exchange Commission filings under SEC Rule 10b-5 for precisely 8:30 on Monday morning. That was exactly 30 minutes before the stock exchanges opened, and 45 minutes before Veritas Dynamics was set to host its annual quarterly investor conference call. Julian planned to use that broadcast to brag about margin expansion. Instead, he was walking straight into a legal guillotine. On Sunday evening, I placed 3 confidential phone calls to Brian Evans, Chloe Bennett, and Eric Crawford. They were the 3 most senior research engineers who had worked under my leadership at Veritas. They were exceptionally talented minds whom Julian routinely underpaid, ignored, and verbally degraded. I disclosed the situation to them in strict confidence. I informed them that I was assuming the role of Chief Technology Officer at Zenith Energy with a $40 million annual research budget, and I wanted them beside me. I offered each of them double their current base compensation, immediate stock option grants, and absolute scientific autonomy. All 3 accepted without a moment's hesitation. Before midnight on Sunday, Brian, Chloe, and Eric logged into Veritas's internal employee portal and submitted their formal, immediate resignations for cause. In a single hour, Veritas Dynamics' core engineering capabilities were completely hollowed out. Finally, we targeted the structural vulnerability that would seal Veritas's corporate demise. During my final month at Veritas, I had reviewed the draft of their pending $40 million supply agreement with Omni Motors. Embedded deep within that contract was Clause 8, a mandatory performance guarantee. Clause 8 mandated that Veritas demonstrate a fully functional, thermally stable solid-state prototype by the end of the third quarter. If Veritas failed to satisfy that benchmark, Omni Motors retained the absolute right to cancel the agreement without financial penalty and reassign the contract to a qualified competitor. Julian had repeatedly assured Omni Motors' board that the prototype was on track. What Julian did not comprehend was that my ceramic electrolyte patent was the sole technology on Earth capable of satisfying Clause 8. Without my patent, Veritas had no prototype. Without a prototype, they would lose their anchor customer, default on their credit facilities, and collapse into insolvency. As I shut my laptop late Sunday night, I looked out over the city lights. Julian had spent years treating dedicated professionals as disposable leverage, believing his title rendered him invincible. He believed he had destroyed my career on Friday afternoon. He had no inkling that when the sun rose on Monday morning, his entire corporate enterprise was going to collapse around him. At 8:15 on Monday morning, Julian Thorne stepped through the glass doors of Veritas Dynamics headquarters carrying a cup of artisanal coffee. He had a pronounced spring in his step. He paused at the security desk, adjusted his silk tie, and flashed a triumphant smile at the staff. In his mind, he was a master executive who had just saved his enterprise millions of dollars by eliminating an overpaid researcher. He walked into his executive corner office, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, and opened his tablet to review his talking points for the 9:15 investor broadcast. He had no idea that at 8:30 sharp, Global Business Wire had broadcast an announcement that sent shockwaves through the international financial system. Zenith Energy published a breaking press release that immediately dominated Bloomberg, Reuters, and every financial news network. The headline was unmistakable: Zenith Energy acquires exclusive global rights to Dr. Frank Miller's breakthrough solid-state energy architecture for $30 million. The statement formally announced my appointment as Chief Technology Officer of Zenith Energy, placing their entire clean energy division under my operational control. Attached directly to the public SEC Rule 10b-5 disclosure was a high-resolution, crystal-clear digital document scan of Julian Thorne's signed intellectual property rejection and abandonment waiver. The document clearly displayed his signature, the corporate seal of Veritas Dynamics, and the timestamp from Friday afternoon, establishing to the global market that Veritas had voluntarily surrendered every legal right, title, and interest in the breakthrough technology. Within 3 minutes of the news hitting the wires, institutional markets reacted with brutal speed. Veritas Dynamics' stock ticker flashed vibrant red across trading desks. In pre-market trading, Veritas shares crashed by 17% as institutional funds dumped their holdings in a panic. Inside Veritas's executive suite, absolute bedlam erupted. Julian's executive assistant burst into his office without knocking, her face pale, holding a stack of freshly printed financial alerts. Seconds later, Julian's desk telephone began ringing uncontrollably. The flashing red lines represented urgent calls from the chairman of the board, primary venture capital partners, and lead institutional shareholders. Julian stared at the press release on his screen in total horror. Color drained from his face, leaving him a ghostly white. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany, screaming for his general counsel. "Get our legal team on the line right now!" Julian bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. "File an emergency injunction. Sue him for corporate theft. Sue Zenith. Have him arrested for stealing trade secrets." 10 minutes later, Veritas's senior outside legal counsel joined an emergency conference call. Julian was pacing wildly across his office rug, hyperventilating, demanding that his attorneys freeze Zenith's assets and repossess the patent. The lead legal partner listened to Julian's hysterical demands in complete silence before interrupting him with a brutal, cold reality check. "Julian, quiet down and listen to me," the attorney said coldly. I am staring at the waiver you signed on Friday. You executed an unconditional, board-witnessed abandonment release. You explicitly declared the technology worthless, stripped Veritas of all corporate rights, and returned total personal ownership to Dr. Miller. You gave it away, Julian. The document is legally airtight. If we attempt to file an injunction against him, Zenith will countersue us for civil fraud and malicious prosecution, and they will obliterate us in court within 10 minutes. Before Julian could process the lawyer's words, his vice president of human resources walked into the office, looking utterly defeated. She informed him that Brian Evans, Chloe Bennett, and Eric Crawford, Veritas's top 3 senior research engineers, had all resigned effective immediately. Veritas's primary testing facility was entirely empty. The lab benches were bare, the equipment was powered down, and their technological pipeline was non-existent. Julian was standing inside the smoking ruins of his own creation, trapped entirely by his own arrogant deceit. By 11 o'clock that morning, the crisis had escalated beyond crashing equity prices. It threatened the immediate survival of the firm. The lead procurement officer from Omni Motors called an emergency executive video summit. They had read the morning disclosures and were thoroughly outraged. Omni Motors had spent months negotiating a $40 million contract based on the promise of next-generation battery performance. Now, they were watching that exact technology commercialized by Veritas's main competitor, with the primary inventor leading Zenith's department. The Omni executive demanded immediate answers, giving Julian precisely 2 hours to demonstrate how Veritas intended to satisfy their mandatory clause. 8 performance benchmark without the core patent or the engineering team. Desperate and cornered, Julian convened an emergency video call with Veritas's board of directors. He attempted to construct an elaborate defense, claiming that I had acted in bad faith, falsified lab metrics, and sabotaged the company before defecting to Zenith. He believed he could scapegoat me to save his career. He failed to realize that I had anticipated every single falsehood he would attempt to tell. Within 30 minutes of Julian's board meeting commencing, Zenith's legal department issued a formal public counterstatement. We released time-stamped audio and video recording meetings of Friday's boardroom meeting, alongside my full email correspondence with Julian. The recordings vividly captured Julian mocking the research, labeling the patent worthless junk science, and explicitly declaring that he was terminating the project to avoid paying my contractual buyout bonus. The evidence was absolute. Veritas's board of directors realized instantly that Julian had exposed the enterprise to catastrophic legal liability, surrendered their core technological asset, and wiped out 40% of the firm's market valuation in under 3 hours, all because he was too greedy to honor a $2 million bonus to his lead scientist. The chairman of the board immediately suspended Julian's executive spending authority and initiated an emergency shareholder vote of no confidence to remove him as chief executive officer. At 12:30 on Monday afternoon, my personal cell phone vibrated on my desk at Zenith Energy headquarters. The caller ID displayed Julian Thorne's private mobile number. I permitted it to ring 3 times before answering and activating the speakerphone. "Frank, please do not hang up," Julian gasped. His voice was trembling, completely devoid of the arrogant, mocking tone he had used on Friday afternoon. He sounded like a broken, desperate man. "I am listening, Julian," I said calmly. "Frank, we can resolve this," he pleaded, his breathing fast and shallow. "It was all an unfortunate misunderstanding. I was under immense pressure regarding quarterly operating margins. I will rectify this immediately. I will personally authorize double your original buyout bonus, $4,500,000 in cash today, if you sign a sub-licensing agreement allowing Veritas to utilize the patent. Please, Frank. My board is preparing to vote me out. My executive career is ruined if you refuse to assist me." I listened to his desperate hyperventilation, feeling a profound cold sense of quiet satisfaction. I recalled how he had sat at the head of the boardroom table on Friday, flanked by his vice presidents, mocking my life's work and attempting to destroy my professional standing. "Julian," I said softly, letting a long silence hang in the air, "why on earth would you wish to supplescience complete and worthless junk science?" Before he could utter another word, I disconnected the call. At 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, I returned to Veritas Dynamics headquarters. I did not enter through the employee's side door, nor did I carry a cardboard box. I arrived at the main entrance in a sleek black executive sedan, accompanied by Malcolm Hayes, Zenith's chief legal officer, and two senior corporate partners, the security guards at the main entrance, who had been following the global news reports all morning, stood at attention and immediately signaled us through, without requesting visitor badges. We had not been invited by Julian Thorne. We had been summoned directly by the chairman of Veritas's board of directors, who had assumed emergency operational control to prevent total corporate liquidation. As we walked down the wide glass corridor toward the executive conference room, the entire facility fell dead silent. Employees stood up from their cubicles, whispering quietly among themselves as they watched our arrival. Just 72 hours earlier, Julian had attempted to cast me out as a disgraced employee. Now, I was returning as the chief technology officer of their dominant competitor, holding the key to their firm's survival in my hands. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the glass boardroom, the exact room where Julian had laughed at me on Friday. Seated around the long table were the members of Veritas's board of directors and their legal team. At the far end of the table sat Julian Thorne. He was completely unrecognizable. His suit jacket was gone, his collar was unbuttoned, his tie was crooked, and his eyes were bloodshot and hollow. The condescending smirk he had worn 3 days ago was entirely erased, replaced by a vacant, defeated stare. The silver pen he had used to sign my waiver still sat untouched in the center of the table. The board chairman stood up immediately, extending his hand to Malcolm and me. "Dr. Miller, Mr. Hayes," the chairman said, his voice flat and weary. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us on such short notice. I will not waste your time with corporate platitudes. Veritas Dynamics is in an existential crisis. Our anchor client, Omni Motors, has issued a final deadline. If we cannot present a verified, legally secured pathway to a solid-state prototype by 5 o'clock today, they will formally terminate our supply agreement." The chairman paused, taking a deep breath before presenting his proposal. Veritas is prepared to pay Zenith Energy an extraordinary premium for a non-exclusive secondary licensing agreement. "For your ceramic electrolyte architecture," the chairman continued, "we will accept whatever financial terms are reasonable to permit us to honor our client commitments." I sat down at the head of the conference table, placing my hands calmly over my portfolio. I looked around the room, meeting the anxious eyes of every board member before resting my gaze directly upon Julian. "Gentlemen," I said quietly, my voice echoing across the silent room, "Zenith Energy did not come here today to throw a financial lifeline to an executive team built on deceit. We are open to discussing a secondary manufacturing arrangement for Veritas's facilities, but our participation is strictly conditional." Julian sat up abruptly, his knuckles turning white as he slammed his hands against the table edge. "You do not dictate terms to this board, Frank," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Be quiet, Julian," the chairman snapped coldly, shutting him down instantly. I turned back to the chairman. "Our conditions are absolute and entirely non-negotiable. First, Veritas's board must execute the immediate cause-based termination of Julian Thorne. He must be removed from his post without a single dollar of severance, equity vesting, or executive compensation. Second, Veritas must issue a full, formal, public retraction acknowledging that Julian falsely disparaged my research in a fraudulent attempt to evade contractual obligations." Julian leaped out of his chair, knocking his water glass across the polished wood. "This is unhinged," Julian screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He is doing this out of a personal vendetta. He wants to ruin my career. You cannot yield to his demands. I built this company." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my portfolio, pulled out a copy of my original employment agreement alongside Julian's executed abandonment waiver, and laid them in front of the chairman. "Julian did not build this enterprise," I stated clearly. "He endangered its entire existence to steal a $2 million bonus. He committed gross negligence, breached his fiduciary duty to shareholders under corporate law, and destroyed 40% of your firm's market value in 3 hours. His continued presence is a legal and financial biohazard." The chairman looked down at the signed waiver, then looked up at Julian with absolute contempt. He did not even consult Julian. He looked around the table at the assembled board members, all those in favor of Dr. Miller's conditions for immediate termination. "For cause, raise your hand," the chairman declared. Every single board member in the room raised their hand without a moment's hesitation. Julian stood frozen, his mouth open, staring in sheer horror as his own board turned against him. "Julian Thorne," the chairman said coldly, "your employment with Veritas Dynamics is terminated immediately for gross breach of fiduciary duty. Security is waiting outside." Two uniformed security officers pushed open the boardroom doors, walked straight up to Julian, firmly gripped him by the arms, and escorted the disgraced former executive out of the building in front of his entire former staff. By Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Julian Thorne had labeled my life's work worthless junk science, the complete restructuring of our corporate sector was finalized. The image of Julian being marched out of Veritas headquarters by security, carrying his personal desk items inside battered cardboard box, was leaked online and went viral across business media. The executive who had spent a decade stepping on researchers, stripping scientists of their credit, and hoarding unearned bonuses was finally exposed to the entire industry as a greedy, incompetent fraud. With Julian removed and Veritas's executive leadership completely dismantled, Malcolm Hayes and I executed the final phase of our strategic consolidation. Veritas's board, desperate to avoid total bankruptcy, agreed to Zenith Energy's comprehensive acquisition terms. Instead of merely licensing the technology, Zenith absorbed Veritas's advanced manufacturing plants, regional testing facilities, and hardware infrastructure at a 70% discount. Simultaneously, the executive board at Omni Motors formally terminated their agreement with Veritas and executed an exclusive, multi-year, $150 million supply contract directly with Zenith Energy. By combining my patented ceramic architecture with Veritas's absorbed manufacturing facilities, Zenith established an unassailable monopoly over the next-generation electric vehicle market. The financial compensation for my work was staggering, but entirely earned. The $30 million direct licensing fee was wired into my private holding account, alongside my $4 million signing bonus and a significant 3% equity stake in Zenith Energy. In less than 7 days, Julian's attempt to rob me of $2 million had resulted in a personal net worth exceeding $40 million. More importantly, scientific integrity was restored to the researchers who actually built the future. Brian Evans, Chloe Bennett, and Eric Crawford were appointed as senior directors of research at Zenith, provided state-of-the-art laboratories, uncapped experimental budgets, and guaranteed equity sharing in every future patent they developed. The toxic environment of executive intimidation and credit theft was permanently erased, replaced by an engineering culture built on mutual respect, scientific truth, and fair reward. On Friday evening, I stood inside my new executive corner office on the top floor of Zenith Energy's downtown headquarters. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting a warm golden light across the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. On the large flat-screen television mounted on my wall, a financial news broadcast was playing on mute. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen detailed the ongoing legal nightmare facing Julian Thorne. Veritas's institutional shareholders had filed a massive class-action lawsuit against him personally for breach of fiduciary duty, while federal regulatory authorities had opened an official investigation into his fraudulent corporate disclosures. Stripped of his severance, facing complete personal bankruptcy, and blacklisted from every corporate board in the nation, Julian's career was permanently finished. I picked up my coffee mug and looked out at the city lights igniting one by one. Julian had sat across from me in a boardroom, looked me in the eye, and told me that my intelligence, my dedication, and my patent were completely worthless. He believed he could use his title, his arrogance, and corporate red tape to bully a quiet scientist out of what he had earned. He failed to comprehend that true power does not derive from an executive title or a tailored suit. It stems from technical competence, thorough preparation, and knowing your true worth. In his desperate gamble to save $2 million, Julian Thorne handed me an empire, made me a multi-millionaire 30 times over, and destroyed his own life in the process. I took a slow sip of my coffee, smiled, and turned back to my desk to build the future.